In the dense forests of upstate New York during 1862, a discovery was made beneath the floorboards of a long-abandoned church, 143 unmarked graves. Local authorities documented that every skeleton showed signs of systematic torture, fractured limbs that had healed before death, evidence of repeated near-drowning, and strange markings carved directly into the bone. For more than 160 years, federal records regarding the Church of the Pure Spirit remained sealed, accessible only to those with special clearance. Now, I've obtained documents never before shared with the public. They detail how three brothers, Elder Ezra, Deacon Silas, and Prophet Caleb Ravencraft, convinced hundreds of devoted followers that suffering was the only path to salvation. Their dark rituals of purification led to what may be the most disturbing religious cult in American history. The small settlement of Ravenwood in upstate New York was unremarkable for most of the early 19th century. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forest, about 40 miles north of Albany, it was home to perhaps 300 souls who made their living through farming, timber, and trade with nearby towns. Founded in 1803 by settlers moving north from the Hudson Valley in search of fertile land and new opportunities, Ravenwood, like much of upstate New York during that era, found itself at the epicenter of what historians would later call the Second Great Awakening. That was a period of intense religious revival sweeping across America in the early 1800s. The region became known as the Burned-Over District because of the fervor of religious movements that seemed to ignite and spread like wildfire through its communities. It was a time when new denominations were born, old faiths were questioned, and charismatic preachers could draw thousands to outdoor revival meetings. Into this spiritual tumult in the summer of 1825 arrived the Ravencraft brothers. Elder Ezra, the eldest at 42, had the commanding presence of a man used to being obeyed. His deep-set eyes, nearly black in certain light, seemed to peer into your very soul when he spoke of divine matters. Deacon Silas, 39, appeared more scholarly, with wire-rimmed spectacles and slender fingers perpetually stained with ink from his endless writing of religious texts. Prophet Caleb, the youngest at 35, had an unsettling quality that many found both attractive and disturbing. He spoke in whispers that somehow carried across crowded rooms, and his pale blue eyes would often roll back during what he claimed were divine visions. The brothers arrived with considerable wealth, purchasing a large tract of land on the edge of town, where they immediately began construction on what they called the Church of the Pure Spirit. Unlike the simple white clapboard meeting houses common throughout New England and New York, their church was built of dark stone quarried from the nearby hills. Its architecture was unusual, a central octagonal sanctuary surrounded by 8 smaller chambers, with a steeple rising to a height that seemed excessive for such a remote location. Most striking was the absence of windows in the main sanctuary. Light was provided only by carefully positioned lanterns during services. "We have been called by the Spirit to this place," Elder Ezra announced at their first gathering, which curiosity had made well attended, despite initial local skepticism. "In an age of false prophets and lukewarm faith, we bring the true message of purification through tribulation. The Spirit has revealed to us that this community shall be the cradle of a new understanding." The brothers had timed their arrival perfectly. By 1825, America's religious landscape was fractured and uncertain. Traditional denominations like the Episcopalians and Presbyterians were losing ground to more emotional, demonstrative faiths. Methodists gained converts through circuit riders who delivered fiery sermons on the frontier. Baptists expanded rapidly with their emphasis on individual conversion experiences. New American-born faiths were emerging. The Mormons would begin their journey just 1 year later and less than 100 miles away when Joseph Smith published the Book of Mormon in 1830. In this environment of spiritual searching, the Ravencrafts' message found fertile ground. Their doctrine was deceptively simple at first. True salvation could be achieved only through suffering that burned away sin and impurity. They cited biblical passages about refinement through fire and Christ's suffering on the cross. But what distinguished their teaching was the literal interpretation. Physical suffering was not merely metaphorical, but necessary for spiritual cleansing. The flesh is the vessel of sin, Deacon Silas would explain during early sermons, his voice measured and reasonable. Therefore, the flesh must be tested, tried, and purified through tribulation. Only when the body has been broken can the spirit truly soar. Their congregation grew steadily through that first year. The brothers were selective about who could join, requiring potential members to undergo a discernment interview with Prophet Caleb, who would determine if they were worthy vessels for purification. Those accepted came mainly from three groups: the desperately poor seeking community and purpose, the deeply troubled seeking redemption from past sins, and the wealthy seeking spiritual experiences beyond what traditional churches offered. Margaret Wilkins was among the first converts, a widow who had lost her husband and 2 children to scarlet fever the winter before. She had been contemplating ending her life when she encountered Elder Ezra in town. "He looked at me as though he could see my thoughts," she wrote in a journal later discovered by federal investigators. "He told me my suffering had meaning, that it was preparing me for a greater purpose. For the first time since burying my family, I felt something other than despair." By 1827, the Church of the Pure Spirit had grown to nearly 100 members. Some lived in simple dwellings built around the church, while others kept homes in Ravenwood but spent most of their time at the compound. The Ravencrafts encouraged members to donate their property and savings to the church, explaining that worldly attachments prevent spiritual elevation. The most devoted followers were invited to become vessels of the Spirit, a special status that required them to undergo more intensive purification rituals. These early ceremonies were relatively mild compared to what would come later: extended fasting, night-long prayer vigils, and rituals involving ice-cold water that symbolized the drowning of the sinful self. What few outsiders realized was how methodically the Ravencrafts escalated the intensity of these practices. Like the proverbial frog in slowly heating water, their followers were conditioned to accept increasingly extreme forms of purification without recognizing the dangerous path they traveled. By 1829, when construction began on an extensive network of chambers beneath the church, the brothers had established complete control over their followers' lives, thoughts, and bodies. The stage was set for darkness to descend upon the Church of the Pure Spirit. As Prophet Caleb reportedly told his brothers in a private meeting documented years later, "The sheep have been gathered. Now begins the true work of the shepherd." The people